they say that in ancient times, in a vast land called Persia, there ruled a beloved, wise, and just king named Sabur. And he had 3 daughters, each like a young moon, and a son, Prince Kumar, whose beauty and nobility they did not yield to the daylight. The country thrived, and the king often held lavish feasts for the court nobles and foreign guests, and every invited guest was bestowed with generous gifts. But even the most miserable beggar could come to the palace, and no one left his doors hungry, and every invited guest was bestowed with generous gifts. But even the most miserable beggar could come to the palace, and no one left his doors hungry. On one of those festive days, 3 wise men entered to see the king. They knew that the king loved clever and intricate mechanisms powered by fascinating magic and amusing toys, and hoped for a warm welcome. There were elders skilled in crafts and inventions, possessing rare knowledge, and they had grasped the secrets of magic. They spoke different languages, for they had come from different countries, and they grasped the secrets of magic. They spoke different languages, for they had come from different countries. One was from India, one from Greece, and one from the Maghreb. The elder from India stepped forward. One was from India, one from Greece, and one from the Maghreb. The elder from India stepped forward. He bowed his head, respectfully greeted the king, and placed a marvelous object before him. And it was a golden archer wearing a helmet adorned with feathers and studded with diamonds. In his hands he held a long golden tube. "Why this warrior?" the king asked. "And how will he serve me?" "Oh, comparable." The Indian bowed his turban. "Put him as a guard at the city gates. Day and night he will guard your peace. If the enemy approaches the city, he will raise the tube and its sound will kill any foe." If this is true, the king rejoiced, "you can take anything you want from me." The Greek stepped forward and, falling to the ground, kissed the earth between the king's shoes. He placed a large silver nest before him, in which sat a golden peacock surrounded by 24 golden chicks. "Is this bird only for beauty and amusement?" the king asked. And the sage replied, "Oh, perceptive. This peacock keeps track of the hours of day and night. At the end of each hour, he pecks the correct number of chicks. And so until then, until it arrives, the last 24 hours. And when the month ends, a full moon will roll out of his beak." "If your words are true," the king said, "you can take whatever you wish from me." And the last sage approached the king, and behind him came the servants, bringing in a horse carved from black ebony. A whimsical pattern twisted across the saddle made of golden leather, and the bridle, it was adorned with emeralds. King Sabur was amazed by the beauty of the marvelous horse and asked, "Is this horse good for utility or for decoration?" "Oh, exquisite," said the wise man from Maghreb. "This horse can soar into the clouds and in an instant take its rider to places that would take a year to reach." The king was amazed by all these wonders and wished to experience them right away. At the signal of the elder from India, the golden archer raised the trumpet, and the sound shook the walls of the palace. The Greek wound up the peacock with a golden key, and he began to peck at his chicks. striking midday. And the wise man from Maghreb mounted the black horse, soared into the sky, and emerging from the clouds, descended to earth. The king gladly accepted the gifts from the wise men and said, "Now I am ready to fulfill my promises. Demand what you wish to receive in exchange for these amazing wonders." Now I am ready to fulfill my promises. Demand what you wish to receive in exchange for these amazing miracles. It must be said that the fame of the beauty of the three princesses reached the farthest corners of the earth, the wise men said in unison. The fame of the princesses reached the farthest corners of the earth. And the wise men said in unison, "Give us your daughters' wives, and we will become your loyal sons-in-law." The king was enchanted and agreed. The princesses hid. Without a moment's hesitation he agreed, and instructed the vizier to start preparing for 3 weddings without delay. The princesses hid, horrified by the old men their father chose. They looked in horror at the old men whom their father had chosen for them as husbands. These old men were all incredibly ugly. But the most repulsive of them was the Maghrebi, a little man with crooked legs and a face as yellow and shriveled as a dried apricot, with tiny red eyes and a huge nose, a pear hanging in the meat. In his mouth there were sparse, rotten teeth, and his hair looked like a tangled clump of dry grass. The youngest daughter, who was supposed to marry this monster, flexible as a vine, delicate and beautiful like a rose petal. In horror she hid in her chambers, daring not to contradict her father. She buried her face in the pillows and sobbed in despair. It so happened that her brother, Prince Kumar, was passing by. Hearing the girl's bitter sobs, he entered her room and asked who dared to hurt his beloved younger sister. "Oh, woe is me," the young maiden said, bursting into tears. "My father is giving me to that hideous monster in exchange for some wooden horse." "My father is giving me to that hideous monster in exchange for some wooden horse. I'd rather die. I'd rather spend my whole life on the streets among the poor and the homeless for some wooden horse. I'd rather die. I'd rather spend my whole life on the streets among the poor and the homeless." The princess was shaken. With her words he hurried to his father. "Is it true, oh just king?" he exclaimed. "Is it true that you are willing to give my sister away for the old sorcerer in exchange for a wooden horse?" Hearing these words, Mokrabinets was instantly filled with hidden anger. He realized that the prince could stand between him and the coveted reward. But my son tried to calm him down. "King, you haven't seen the wonderful horse that this sage gifted us yet. He just soared into the sky right before our eyes." Kumar, who was an excellent rider, frowned. "Show me this horse," he demanded. "I'll saddle it myself and see what wonders it can do." "Show me this horse," he demanded. "I'll saddle it myself and see what wonders it can do." The Maghrebian, with a sly smile, helped the prince get into the saddle. But no matter how much the rider spurred his horse, I didn't urge him on or pull on the reins, and he didn't move. "Show him what to do," the king ordered. "Let him touch the lever for ascent, which is hidden on the right side of the horse's neck," the elder said. As soon as the prince followed the Maghrebian's advice, the horse soared into the sky and disappeared from sight along with its rider. A few moments passed. The sky was empty. "Bring the horse back to the ground," said the worried king. "O ruler of time, the sage replied. "The prince flew away so quickly that he didn't even ask me how to come back down to earth. I am powerless, and you may never see your son again." The king was enraged by these words. He called the guards and ordered them to throw the elder into the dungeon. The feast was cancelled, and the king, filled with sorrow, retreated to the palace. Meanwhile, the prince, having soared into the sky and found himself surrounded by silent clouds, was trying to tame the unruly horse. If there's a lever for ascent, he thought, there must be a lever for descent as well. He was trying to tame the unruly horse. If there's a lever for ascent, he thought, then there must be a lever for descent. And he found it on the left side of the horse's neck. The levers were shaped like a rooster's head, and Prince Kumar, moving them, suddenly realized that he could easily control the horse. Now he extended and extended his flight, ascending and descending at will. Rejoicing, he raced over lands and cities he had never heard of before, never seen. The horse was fast, but time was catching up with him, and soon the sky darkened and stars began to fill it. The horse was fast, but time was overtaking him, and soon the sky darkened and stars came out. The prince decided to spend the night somewhere and return home in the morning. Seeing a city below him, he made the horse descend onto the roof of the magnificent palace. The night sky merged with the darkness of the earth. Kumar remembered that he hadn't eaten since morning and decided to go in search of food. Descending, he found himself in front of a door where a guard was peacefully sleeping. His sword lay nearby, and a leather bag was hanging on the column. The young man opened the bag and found food and drink inside. After having a bite to eat, picked up the sword and pushed the door open. Before him lay a long corridor that led to another door. He carefully cracked it open and silently stepped inside. This was the women's quarters of the palace. Along the walls stood couches where the maidservants were sleeping, and in the center stood a carved bed under a silk canopy. The prince pushed aside the curtain and saw a girl sleeping peacefully. Her skin was as white as snow. Her lips were as red as a cherry. Her hair flowed over the pillows like sea waves. The prince was breathless at the sight of her beauty. He couldn't help himself, leaned down, and kissed the girl on the cheek. She flinched and woke up. "Who are you?" she whispered fearfully. "I am both your servant and your beloved," the young man smiled. "But how did you get here?" "Fate led me and luck brought me here," he replied vaguely. The girl opened her eyes wide, and she was the only daughter of the king of this land. The princess saw how handsome and noble the young man was. Her fear was replaced by the pleasure of their pleasant conversation. Their conversation woke the maidens. Seeing the stranger, they got alarmed and jumped out of their beds. "Who is this, my lady?" the head maiden exclaimed. "The one who is meant to marry me," the princess replied. At that moment the guard woke up. He ran into the room and shouting, "How did you get in here?" lunged at the young man. But then he aimed the tip of his sword at the guard's chest. "Know this," he said, "that I am the fiancé of your mistress, and you will pay with your life if you dare to touch me." Without saying a word, the guard turned and rushed to the king to inform him of what had happened. The king, trembling with rage, ready to kill the uninvited guest, burst into the women's quarters. Here he was met by the maidens. "Answer me, what is happening here?" the king demanded. "O Lord of the luminaries, giver of happiness and joy of our eyes," they chattered. "Our mistress has been visited by one who surely has royal blood in his veins. He is so handsome and eloquent, and his clothes are so luxurious that his appearance and conversation inspire not fear, but respect and love." These words cooled the king's fury, calmed his anger. Entering his daughter's room, he saw that she and the stranger were chatting happily and laughing joyfully, and asked the newcomer who he was. "I am the one destined by fate to be your daughter's husband," Kumar replied boldly. "But you have violated the customs of our land," the king exclaimed. "You should have asked for her hand in front of witnesses. I have—" "And you, like a thief, sneaked in at night, insulting both my honor and hers." The prince of the city lifted his head. "I am son of the great King Sabur," he said, "and to prove to you that I am worthy of your daughter's hand, I am ready to fight an entire army. When you see your valiant warriors running from me, you will understand that I am brave and strong in spirit." And the king quickly agreed to this, deciding that the young man was just recklessly boasting through the night. The next morning, the entire army of the king was lined up in the open field, 40,000 warriors on battle horses, as many slaves and servants armed to the teeth, and they were ready to take the tails on the tips of their spears and the blades of their swords. The king brought out Prince Kumar before them and said, "This brave man claims that he will send you fleeing. If he does, I will give him my daughter. This brave man claims that he will send you fleeing. If he does, I will give him my daughter." Then he turned to the young man. "Are you ready?" "Oh, most just," replied Kumar. "You wouldn't let me go out on foot against an army of horsemen, would you?" "Let me get on my horse, which is waiting on the palace roof." "How can a horse be standing on the roof of the palace? Who drove him there?" The king exclaimed. But he didn't wait for a response to that. The madman sent people to look for the horse. And oh miracle! They brought forth a black horse carved from ebony. Everyone was just amazed by the beauty of the wooden horse, its wealth, saddle, and bridle. "Is this your horse?" the king asked. "Yes," the prince replied, "and you'll soon see what he's capable of." "This wooden statue?" the king laughed. He couldn't even imagine that a young man, sitting on some toy horse, could defeat an entire army. He couldn't even imagine that a young man, sitting on some toy horse, could defeat an entire army. But the young man jumped into the saddle and started quickly turning the rooster head levers. Defeat an entire army. But the young man jumped into the saddle and started quickly turning the rooster head levers. The horse swayed from side to side, inflating and rounding out from the air that was entering it, and suddenly it shot up and carried its rider over the heads of the warriors. In horror, they dropped their weapons and scattered, and suddenly it shot up and carried its rider over the heads of the warriors. In horror, they dropped their weapons and scattered. The king was furious. He ordered them to capture the prince, but he soared into the clouds and vanished in an instant. Well, who can catch a flying bird? The delighted king hurried to his daughter to tell her that her fiancé had disappeared. "Rejoice, my daughter," shouted. "We were fortunate to get rid of that dangerous sorcerer." But the girl in her grief thought only about the fact that she was separated from the handsome prince. right before their eyes, she began to wither and pale, finding no joy in anything. And Prince Kumar, flying among the swan flock of clouds, couldn't forget the beautiful princess either. He couldn't forget either the beautiful princess. Even when the moon peeked out from behind the clouds, it reminded him of the lunar face of his beloved. He realized that he couldn't live without her, and then he sharply turned the horse and flew back. Under the cover of night, he landed on the palace roof. He went down the stairs, slipped past the sleeping guard, and found himself in front of the princess's door. There he heard the girl crying while her maid was trying to comfort her. "My lady, could it really be? Will you always mourn for the prince who flew away and has surely already forgotten you?" "My sadness will pass when I forget him myself," the princess sobbed loudly. "And I'm afraid that will never happen." And she cried and sighed until he closed her eyes. As soon as everything fell silent, closed her eyes. As soon as everything fell silent, Prince Kumar sneaked inside, pushed aside the bed curtain, and leaned over the sleeping princess. "Oh, what is this? Dew on the rose petals or tears on the cheeks? My beloved?" he whispered. The queen woke up in fright, but upon seeing the prince, she threw herself into his arms. And for another whole hour they, happy and joyful, couldn't take their eyes off each other and kept talking. Finally, the prince reluctantly pulled away from his beloved. "I have to go back home," he said. "Do you want to come with me and live in my country?" "Only with you," she exclaimed, without thinking. They silently slipped out of the room, climbed to the palace roof, and mounting the horse, soared into the sky. Cities, forests, and mountains flashed beneath them, and, finally, they reached the land ruled by King Sabur, the prince's father. The horse descended into the garden in front of the city wall. Kumar dismounted, led the girl to the garden house, and tied the horse at the doorstep. "Wait for me here," he said. "I will go to my father, and I will prepare everything to welcome you as my bride. With all the proper honors." The girl happily agreed and stayed to wait for him to come for her and call her to the city under the canopy, wrapped in ribbons. King Sabur rejoiced at the return of his son, whom he had long given up hope of seeing. The 3 royal daughters rushed to hug and kiss their brother. And the king, in his joy, ordered the sorcerer, the Maghrebian, to be freed. He even sent him gifts as a sign of reconciliation. But he forbade even thinking about marrying the princess and ordered him to leave the city immediately. The prince recounted the story of his travels, telling how he ended up in a foreign city where he fell in love with a beautiful princess. Hearing that his son was about to get married, King Sabura clapped his hands in delight. He called for the vizier and ordered him, without wasting a moment, to decorate the city streets and prepare a lavish procession to properly welcome and escort the princess to the palace. Meanwhile, the old man, released from prison, left the city, swearing that he would never return here. He walked through the garden, muttering words of curses. Suddenly he noticed his wooden horse by the garden house. The old man was overjoyed, approached the horse, and began to look it over, inspecting and feeling it. The horse was intact and unharmed. Then he noticed a girl sitting in the garden house, and immediately realized that she was the very princess brought by Prince Kumar. He heard the servants talking about it. A vengeful thought instantly crossed his mind and took root in the old man's head. A sinister plan. Entering the little house, He bowed low before the girl. "My lady," Krachevo said, the cunning one, "Prince Kumar sent me, unworthy as I am, to take you to the palace." "And where is my fiancée?" she asked distrustfully with disgust. Looking at the ugly messenger, "He prepares to greet his incomparable bride with royal honors," replied the old man, bowing almost to the ground. "So, let's hurry and go there," the princess exclaimed impatiently. The ugly man spoke, hiding his eyes. "I don't dare trouble you with a long journey. We will fly on the horse." At these words, the princess was completely convinced that she was in the presence of the prince's messenger, and he placed her in the saddle. Ahead of him, the horse soared over the gardens and raced away from the city. "Where are you taking me?" the princess exclaimed. The sorcerer just laughed in response. "You will never see this land again, nor your unworthy fiancé," he shouted hoarsely. "How dare you disobey your master?" The girl was outraged. "He is not my master, the great mage and sorcerer," the old man rasped. "They promised me a royal daughter, but I was repaid with a dungeon, and the wonderful horse is the fruit of my magic. The prince has kidnapped her. Now it's my turn to take away his bride and horse, and you will become my wife and servant." The prince has kidnapped her. Now it's my turn to take away his bride and horse, and you will become my wife and servant. The princess was in tears. The sorcerer chuckled maliciously, and the horse obediently followed him. He raced tirelessly into the skies. The kingdom of Sobora had long faded into the distance, and finally they landed on the edge of a forest in an unknown southern land. It happened the Shah and ruler of that land was out on a falconry hunt. He saw a crying girl, an ugly old man, and a strange wooden horse, and he approached them. "Ask who they are, and what they're doing here. He kidnapped me, and is taking me away." "I don't know where," the girl cried out and sobbed even louder. "Don't listen to her." "Good sir, this is my crazy wife," the frightened sorcerer mumbled. But the Shah, captivated by the girl's beauty, only heard her words. He called for the guards. He ordered the old man to be imprisoned, and he placed the maiden on his horse and rode off to the palace. Following behind, the servants carried the ebony horse. And Prince Kumar had lost his beloved bride and the magical horse. Did not succumb to despair. He decided to find them at all costs. Disguised as a merchant, Kumar rode camels, sailed on ships, crossed dreary deserts and shady oases. He passed through countless cities and villages, and traveled from country to country. He asked everywhere about the beautiful princess and the extraordinary flying horse, and then one day, and traveled from country to country. He asked everywhere about the beautiful princess and the extraordinary flying horse. And then one day, in a certain foreign land, stopping to rest at a caravanserai, the prince overheard the merchants talking, exchanging news, talking excitedly about strange happenings. "Have you heard, esteemed ones, what happened recently?" "How so, how so?" "The Shah of this land is planning to get married." "They say he can't." It was said that the beautiful girl had arrived on the magical horse. "I heard that a sorcerer is locked up in the dungeon, who called the girl his wife." Prince Kumar couldn't hold back and, wanting to learn more, approached the merchants and began to ask what had happened to that beautiful girl. "The Shah is keeping her with him." The good-hearted merchant spoke up. "They say she, poor thing, doesn't even want to know him. She spends her days and nights in tears. There are rumors that she was enchanted by the one she flew here with." The Shah announced that whoever heals the girl will be generously rewarded with gold. Kumar didn't waste any time. The very next day, throwing on a doctor's robe, he appeared at the Shah's palace and announced that he could heal the princess. "What do you need for that?" the Shah asked. "Nothing, O powerful and insightful one," Kumar replied. "Allow me to be alone with her, and I will find out the cause of her illness." When the prince was brought into the princess's chamber, he saw that the unfortunate girl was sprawled on the floor, crying inconsolably, covering her face with her hand. "I will not eat until reunited with my beloved. I will not drink till I am with my beloved," knelt before her and, pretending to listen to her breathing, whispered. Kumar knelt down in front of her, pretending to listen to her breathing. He whispered, "I am here, my love, and I have come to free you." At these words the princess gasped. But the young man held her back and continued, "Don't let it show, and pretend that you've completely accepted it. Smile at the Shah and don't contradict him in anything." The princess sighed and smiled, signaling to the prince that she understood everything and would do as he instructed. Then the pretend doctor got up and went to the Shah. "I have found the cause of her illness," he said importantly. "The girl is tormented by a demon. I will exorcise the demon and purify the girl. Tomorrow, on the open meadow, in front of the palace, in front of all the people, I will perform the exorcism of the demon and the purification of the girl. If you do this, is that all you wish for?" the Shah promised. As soon as the sun rose over the tall walls of the city, they brought a wooden horse to the meadow and led the girl out, dressed in a magnificent gown. The Shah also appeared, surrounded by courtiers. Dressed in a magnificent gown, the Shah also appeared, surrounded by courtiers. Everyone eagerly watched the doctor, who was casting spells in front of a large boiling cauldron. "He was throwing herbs," murmured. "He took the princess by the hand and led her to the horse, and he was whispering something. Then he took the princess by the hand and led her to the horse. And suddenly, lifting the girl, he easily jumped into the saddle with her and turned to the right on the horse's neck. The magical steed began to inflate with air and sway. The frightened spectators froze in place, and the horse soared above the meadow. And splashing, with its mane flowing in the wind, it rose higher and higher. "Stop him!" the crimson-faced Shah shouted in anger. "Bring back the villain!" But it was too late. The horse carried its riders up into the clouds, and no arrow could reach them anymore. The flying horse quickly crossed the dome of the heavenly vault and gently descended right in front of King Sabur's palace in Prince Kumar's homeland. The father was happy, embracing his son. He was delighted by the return of the flying horse, and couldn't take his eyes off the beautiful bride of the prince. 40 days passed as they should, and they had a grand wedding. Many times the moon replaced the sun, and then disappeared from the sky, while the feasts and royal wedding ceremonies continued on and on. Finally, the prince escorted his beautiful wife to the private chambers, while King Sabur ordered the wooden horse to be destroyed, so that his son would never leave his blessed land of Persia. And Prince Kumar sent a caravan to his wife's homeland, with expensive gifts and a scroll recounting their adventures that they had to endure. He asked them not to be angry and to approve of their request, a union bound by love. The prince's envoys returned with reciprocal gifts, and a letter filled with the kindest words. And when the one called the Life Destroyer and the storm of separation came to King Sabur in the twilight of his years, and he left this world, Kumar began to rule the country. For many years he ruled over his people, trying to be wise and kind, as every great ruler should be.